Here is the wild card, I think, comes from a different discipline, talking from a slightly different angle. And rather than using participatory method, it links directly really to what Lewis was just saying, drawing on theories and ideas of Paulo Freire, pedagogy of the oppressed, where the notion that anyone could be researchers, anyone could be teachers. He has this notion of the student-teacher, the teacher-student, and looking at kind of participatory ways, working from the ground up rather than curriculum set from the top down. So the ways that I work, as said, I'm kind of a filmmaker, photographer, working kind of image-based media. And really these two examples that I'm drawing on are using space to then inform the making of media projects. So it's not about necessarily making space as you are in terms of architecture and physical design, etc. But it's about working with people. This is where the anthropology comes in, working with people, young people, older people, non-academics essentially, and their responses to space to then inform the making of a media product. I had some slides giving a bit of context of the background of the way that I work. I'm not going to spend too much time on these, but just say that in terms of the background, I'm here, I work for the university and also got a production company outside called Firstborn Creators. Very often they're working in partnership in parallel. And, we got kind of frustrated. Myself, came from a TV documentary background, but got kind of frustrated with the disposable nature of television production. So you're working, TV is a very disposable industry, especially if you're working on a weekly program series. You work your guts off for a week, goes on TV, then you work on next one, then you work on next one, work on next one. It's like, actually, where's the relationship building? Where's the kind of the slow paced working with people? And we got more interested in working with communities rather than just parachuting in, doing to them, and then disappearing to the next one. So I actually wanted to find a model which is more slower paced than working with people and building those longer, sustainable, participatory relationships. So that's why we kind of came out of that TV space and then started working in a different way. So kind of looking at this democratization of the media, empowerment, self-representation, access, participation, inclusion, and media literacy, this idea of using media to access, understand, and create not only technology, but also knowledge and putting your stories back out there in the world. So I'm going to jump through these and then come to the first case study. So first case study, 2007-2008, National Trust, who we had previously worked with, then approached us, and I say us at Firstborn Creators, myself essentially, and my colleague Rob Mitchell. And they wanted us to engage in some research. And it was research that we had already started looking at, and they had sort of heard about it and then came back to us with an idea, essentially to explore the relationship between National Trust properties and the slave trade history. So we put a proposal back to them. It won HLF funding, and then the project started in mid-2008. So I'm how I've kind of designed this presentation. It's also looking at the design of the research. We heard a lot about design research design, etc. And because I'm coming from a slightly different angle, I thought it would be useful to also just look at the structure of the research and how that came about in terms of working with groups. So at this particular point when the project started, there was no actual groups attached from the project from the outset, and that was part of the process of us as the facilitators, was to bring different groups on board. And as it says here, the stakeholders that you brought on board were groups of young people. So essentially we got two groups, independent groups of young people, a senior citizens group based in a day centre in Bath, and also a random, well not random, but a collection of local residents as well. And the properties that we were looking at were Clevedon Court, Durham Park just outside of Bath, and Tinsfield House. And then we took each of those stakeholders to those properties. We did a range of filmmaking, audio recording, map making, a very initial response to those spaces, as well as going back and doing more considered responses. So a whole range of different interventions with those groups and those properties. So our task as facilitators at the first outset was to devise the model of delivery. Again, won't go into this in too much detail, but stage one, research and information gathering, so identifying the broad aims of the project. Anyone working with a national trust will understand that there is a very challenging organisation to work with, because it's not just one organisation, it's a number of different organisations. Each property essentially is its own organisation. So you have the head office of National Trust in Swindon, and they might say, yes, go and work with Tinsford House. When you get to Tinsford House, they've got a whole army of volunteers, the patrons, the curators, and that's another set of gatekeepers to get through. So no matter what they might say at head office, each property at National Trust is its own entity, if you like. So you're restarting the project over and over again, the more properties that you're kind of working with. It's a very interesting organisation to work with. So there was lots of that relationship building to be done with that organisation such as National Trust. And also the volunteers, National Trust couldn't exist and it wouldn't run if it didn't have its volunteers. And the volunteers, often they're local people, they're very passionate about those spaces and those houses, and they're very protective about the histories, and you can understand that. So, they were concerned about what are we going to go in, what are we going to be saying about their properties, how are we going to be painting the narratives of those properties. So, again, there's lots of kind of trust, etc., that has to be built working with these properties, and that can't be done overnight. It really does take some deep level working. Stage two was going in with the groups, then also working on their creative responses. Essentially, it was a creative media project. So what were the groups, how are they responding to the research that they're unearthing, and then how are they then responding to that? And then stage three was essentially an interactive system design. So the main output for this project was an interactive kind of jukebox, if you like. We had this sort of shell made, almost like a jukebox system. It was a touchscreen interactive exhibition that toured the different properties at the end. So that went through. So this is just kind of what it looks like, really, in terms of stage one. Our initial going to all the different properties and different groups, and then visiting the groups, and then continue and work in these in more kind of sustained ways and deeper ways and more involved ways. And you can see the time period gets longer and longer. But then also behind the scenes, we're also taking all the bits of media that are coming out of all these different interventions and then working into this interactive design platform towards the end. So there's a combination of working with the groups and the participants face to face, then also us taking that media away and working with it as, the media professionals, if you like, putting it into a certain shape, bringing it back to them, for them to then see and review, etc., until you get to the end. So, before I play a clip, this is Daisy Otway, resident of Bath, part of the Bath Ethnic Minority Senior Citizens Association, and, seeing these elders walking through the space and their sense of, how it triggered their sense of self, if you like. These are people that came over in 1940s, 1950s, my parents' generation, and very often with this generation, they didn't really talk about a lot of the political stuff. They wanted to come over, make a living, and not really kind of rock the boat. And it's really interesting into this space. A lot of this stuff started coming to the surface in terms of what they'd left behind in their homeland. Daisy had this whole story about her family not being documented in the same way, but then when you go to these houses, you see them documented through to, the 11th century or whatever, where she was actually just trying to get some very basic documentation on her family, and it wasn't there because of that the disconnect that happened. So it actually brought up a lot of very personal responses. walking around the space, which actually wasn't expected from us, by us, really. So I'm just going to play some of the thing, and I'll explain what it is and the reason why we've made it in this way. Because, as I said previously, we've made projects for Channel 4, BBC One, etc., and we've done a number of documentaries. They weren't all on the slave trade, but we've done about 3 or 4 that I directed for television. And when you make a linear piece of media, what you're getting is essentially me as the director, my point of view from beginning, middle, and end. And with not much space for any other voices. And slave trade's one of these histories that it needs those other voices coming in, because it's not just a one-way monologue. So we decided to make it into this interactive that allowed for a multiplicity of voices to come through. So press start, and it should start, hopefully. Okay. So this is what the interactive kind of looks like. It's not fully fitting on the screen, so it's got all those cars driving at the bottom. When you click on one of the properties, it kind of clicks in. Yep, trust it. And then you get these different things at the end. So straight away you can see how it's a different experience to just sitting down, press and play, and just watching something. So we've got the Cleveland Court National Trust Guide here, if I click that. It's got an introduction to the space and the context of the group were. And then we got a visit. So I'll click on the visit, and essentially what we then get is this video jukebox, which are little clips, again, rather than make it into this linear film. And we gave the children the cameras and just let them run around with the cameras. And, on the way to the space, during the visit, on the way back. We had a lovely time there. So we went to Cleveland Court, and it was a study support group from St. Paul's. David, who was one of the tour guides there.
I'm David. 7 years.
What was your most interesting factors that you liked about this job?
What do I like about the job? Well, we had lots of different people come here. We open 3 days a week in the summer, 3 afternoons a week in the summer, and we have all sorts of different people coming. And I meet all sorts of different people. And they have all sorts of different interests. So he was a local politician as well.
They all out.
These are 3 of them. That's the 7th, 8th, and 9th baronets. Now, we also meet people like yourselves, who we haven't had come before. And you've got different interests, and some people are interested in stones and the walls and the architecture. Some people are interested in the Elton family. Other people are interested in the medieval parts of the house, which are the very old bits. And other people come and look at the artifacts. That's the pictures and the chairs and all the furniture. And that's what interests them. Little Polly Flinders sat amongst the cinders, warming her pretty little toes. Her mother came and caught her, and whipped her little daughter for ruining her nice new clothes. The boys think they're okay, so the girls aren't so impressed. Okay?
So that was David, one of the tour guides, and filmed by one of the young people. So had these experiences. The group knew why we were going there, but there wasn't any specific activities as such laid on when we went to the spaces, and that was deliberate. We wanted to experience the spaces and wanted the group to experience the spaces as you would any other visitor. So this was the response on the way back home, back to Bristol, from Cleveland Court, when we asked them, what did you think about the visit?
How come there was no black people there?
There were.
I mean, on the bills, you could never see the black people on the pictures.
Did you see the back of the picture?
Yeah.
I don't know. Is that a question you'd like to ask them?
How can there no black people at that time?
But they never took you anywhere. Remember, they only showed us some of the rooms that the rich people own. Basically, it's all about rich people. They didn't take us down to where they used to have them.
They never take us where they took the slaves. We wanted to see where they took the slaves.
The man said, the man said you're taking them down to the dungeon.
What dungeon?
I don't know, I heard something about a dungeon.
They were giving the enslaved people who lived
they didn't say nothing about slaves or anything. They were just talking about the house and the people that lived there. Nothing about slaves didn't come into it. But you see the little stairway thing? They said it was to let the shutter things down and everything. Really, I think it was like what little slaves used to go up. That's what I think those stairs are. But that's like we're gonna say, yeah, the slaves used to move up and down there. We ain't gonna say that.
So you could do little things hidden.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else? So, anything else?
Slavery.
So you see, and then here's just a note where these other voices can come in, and throughout it you get these kind of long, you can get short notes and longer academic notes talking about some of the things talked about in the video. What we saw there, and this is what I ended up writing about this, is in a way some of the accusations that you get across when it comes to slave trade discourse is that, you know, sweeping it under the carpet, not talking about it, etc., etc. So the young people went there knowing what the research was before they went there. There's a very direct connection with Clevedon Court and slave trade history with Elton family who lived there. But because it was never mentioned, automatically saw the young people fill it with assumption. 2 minutes, wow, okay. Fill it with assumption. And, you know, where myths start to come in and where assumptions start to come in and conjecture, etc., etc. And it's really interesting. And also, when we went to Durham Park, there was even more stark experience where in front of us there were these two, about this tall, called jardinières, these big sculptures. There's one there was another one on the other side where the screen was. And essentially they're sculptures of black people with chains around their ankles, holding these big kind of bowls. And in the room, you come in from that side and then you exit from that side. So there'd be a rope where those two pillars are. And the guide talked about every single thing in the room except these two huge sculptures which were right in front of us. And it was, you know, it was just a very stark example of when you don't talk about something, actually that's unhealthy. I'm going to very quickly play for the last 2 minutes. I'll talk over it, actually. The second case study, which was a recent project. So that last one's 2008. This one is this year. Just finished in February of this year, 2016. And it was working with a group of young people in Bath City. And they were interested in the presence of black people who lived in Bath in Georgian and Victorian times. So you heard the guy in the other one say, oh, where's the black people? How come there were no black people in those times? Or how come we're not in the pictures? And it's not a deliberate correlation, but this project essentially is starting to fill that gap. So it's looking at actual research of black presence, black people living in Bath in Georgian and Victorian period. The young people themselves did the research. They work with Bath Records Office, and in the very first session, they chose, there was a whole range of different artifacts and articles, etc., for them to read through and look at. And at the end of the first session, they chose who they're interested in exploring, and then I was brought in to facilitate and to turn their fragments of research into a film. So I then, got 30 seconds, that kind of thing. So I then worked with them, found out who they're interested in, helped them turn them into sort of scripts and poems and bits of narrative, and then I, on top of that, then made a film with their voices underneath. And essentially what you see in this film is the black presence embedded in the Bath landscape. And you see it kind of seamlessly, if I just pause this, going through. So the whole film, the black presence is there, but it's also not there. It's subtle in the landscape. It's seen and unseen, and that sort of sense that there's a history that's there, but it's not talked about, it's not really ever mentioned, it's not even willfully hidden, it's just not talked about, it's ignored or whatever, which causes a whole set of problems. So 2 different examples of 2 different projects, very different approaches to research design, but there's a continuity of how it's using place to inspire a new set of ideas and bringing a new visualization of space to the surface, I guess. So, yeah, I'll end it there. Thank you very much.